This is the perfect camera for me. So people, excuse the slurping, but this is really hot tea. Great mint tea at that. No beer for me yet, as I've still got some driving to do later on today. And welcome to today's video, and the subject of which is this, the Sony a7R Mark I. And why this is the perfect camera for me, and why I'm trying to sell it. Now, the way this is going to work, I'm talking about this from my own personal point of view. So, things like the admittedly slow autofocus, or I don't know what else, may be actual things, are completely irrelevant for me, because you will see why. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. To start things off, I want you to please consider supporting me if you find this, what I'm doing here, the content on this channel, enjoyable, helpful, or entertaining. Please consider supporting me. And the number one best thing you can do to support me is to hit the like button and share this video with your friends. That out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video. This is the perfect camera for me. This is the world's first digital full-frame mirrorless camera. Well, together with the A7, but this is the a7R, the high-resolution, more pro camera of the two. I will first talk about some very subjective things regarding this camera and how I use it, and I will touch upon some factual, objective stuff. First of all, I want to quickly mention that before using this camera I had the Sony a6000, which in its own right, very capable little camera, was a crop sensor camera, an APS-C. And I always wanted a full-frame camera. I found this used in 2020 at a really great price, something around $600 back then. This was a great bargain. Practically brand new, didn't even have a mark on it, in box, with every accessory it ships with. A little less than 15,000 frames. This is practically virgin territory, because these sensors are rated at around 150K, 200K, I'm not sure. Anyway, I got it for cheap and I upgraded my Sony a6000. Now, what made me get this camera was, of course, the price. It was the best mirrorless full-frame camera, and the best and only full-frame mirrorless camera I could afford back then. There was the regular A7, and to cut a long story short, I got this kind of like by mistake. The seller had mislabeled this, and he thought he was selling the A7. I thought I was buying the A7, when in actuality it was the a7R. We kind of bargained for the price because of the misunderstanding, and I ended up getting the a7R, which was a great happy mistake, because I have grown to love this sensor. And just to quickly and very briefly mention a few key characteristics, this is a 36 megapixel Bayer pattern sensor without without an anti-aliasing filter. And this is important because the AA filter, while on the one hand it does fix issues like moire, its drawbacks are that it kind of diminishes the sharpness a little. A sensor without an AA filter is supposed to be, and it is, very, very sharp. Now, 1080p is the max that this can do. 1080p 60 frames per second in a VCHD codec. I think I got that right. That's entirely decent, the video capabilities of this camera, and the photo capabilities are just like great, really spectacular. This 36 megapixel sensor is something to write home about. Now, I do mostly, like practically only, street photography, and some people use 12 megapixels for that, and it certainly can be entirely sufficient. However, I find that it's great to have the option of having a really large megapixel sensor like this. Now, it's entirely preferable to have something and not need it than to need something and not have it. I love the comfort it gives me that if I want to heavily crop an image, I can, and still be left with sufficient resolution. I mean, I can turn a 36 megapixel landscape shot into a 12 or 16 megapixel portrait shot and still be able to print it large. So having the ability to shoot a lot of megapixels and being able to crop later in post is really, really fantastic. For the way I work, the way I shoot, I like the really great resolution sensor. Another thing that this does well is the fact that taking a really big sensor image like this and shrinking it, because I do shrink all the images I post online to 2048 by the long edge. Shrinking a lot of megapixels into a small space, it does two things to improve the image quality. Firstly, whatever noise there may be, it kind of shrinks it in a way that it makes it less noticeable. And the detail, well, let me tell you, the detail gets enhanced a lot. You really, really get an even sharper image when you squish a lot of megapixels into a small space. So that makes for really great images. Now, I've touched upon the noise. Well, on paper, the A7, or rather any otherwise equal sensor with less megapixels should fare better in low light. I have always found this to be perfectly capable in low light. I've shot images at 12,800 ISO, and while there is noticeable and quite visible noise, it's not unpleasant. You can certainly use those images, and with just a little post-processing, it's entirely serviceable. That said, I found the dynamic range of this camera to be really, really great. I think it's rated at 14 and change stops of dynamic range, which is really great even by today's standards. This is good tea, man. Excuse the slurping, but it's still hot. As is this. Announced in, I think it was late 2013 and launched in 2014. This is a 9-year-old camera. This is still hot AF. It does not have a built-in image stabilizing sensor. It does not do 4K video. It has a slow autofocus, which is entirely irrelevant to me because I use exclusively vintage lenses. So I focus all my lenses by hand. Moving on, I think I want to talk a little about the build quality and aspect. Now, this camera is made out of a magnesium alloy, and although the manufacturer, that being Sony, claims a certain degree of weather resistance, like dust and proofing, I don't entirely trust it, because if you open these flaps, there are no rubber gaskets to be seen. That said, I have shot this camera in heavy snow at -15 degrees Celsius. I have shot this camera in torrid heat at 40 degrees Celsius. I've shot this camera in the rain, and it has always performed like a beast. It has never let me down. There were never any issues with it whatsoever. I've never had any issues with it, and functionality-wise, it's really great. One thing I enjoy most probably is the way this feels in hand. Now, I've mentioned the magnesium alloy body. The A7, the regular A7, has a plastic body, while this has a magnesium alloy body, making it on the one hand more durable and on the other lighter. Well, not lighter than plastic, but lighter than metal or something like that. And this camera feels like an absolute unit. You know, there's this thing about gadgets and tech that can almost not be described in words and only felt. I'm, however, going to try. When you hold it, this camera has a certain density to it. When you squeeze it and press it, there's no give, there's no looseness, there is hardly any shake at all. Let me just hold these. I think this is just the screen, and there's really hardly any shake at all. This camera feels like a slab of technology. It feels like an absolute unit. It feels really great in hand, and it feels like this only after I've added this grip, this metal grip with Arca Swiss, because it really does have a rather shallow grip. It's kind of thin, but once I've added this metal grip, this is perfect. While before I didn't have any room, any comfortable room for my middle finger, and I had to hold it underneath the camera like this, which is really uncomfortable. After putting this grip on it, it has its own space here, and it's really comfortable. The grip suddenly feels comfortable and sufficiently deep. Overall, this camera is a joy to hold and use. I do have to admit, I like handsome gear, pretty electronics. I do think it matters how stuff looks, and it matters that you enjoy it. Let's take Canons, for instance, especially the R lineup. I really find them to be very bland in terms of aesthetics and looks. Very forgettable, very meh, very uninspiring. While on the other hand, this camera is an inspiration. When I look at it, when I hold it, it makes me want to use it. It feels enjoyable. It looks great. Just take a look. And this is the Carl Zeiss Sienna Tessar 50mm 2.8. This is a 70-year-old lens, and I'm working on a review for it. This is the Konica Hexanon AR 40mm 1.8. Let me just switch lenses and show you looks. This is just really fantastic. Just look at it. Look at it. This is pure class. This oozes coolness. When I look at it, when I hold it, it just feels very inspiring. It makes me want to go out and shoot. It makes me want to click buttons and turn knobs and rings and focus and compose, and yeah, I'm geeking out a little already, but it does look great. Moving on, I do want to touch upon a few things that people have claimed, justifiably so, if I'm honest, to be flaws of this camera. The slow autofocus is completely irrelevant to me. I've said that. I'll leave it at that. The shutter is another big issue. Well, rather, it was when this came out, because practically nobody ever talks about this now. But the shutter is supposed to be really very loud. It's not silent by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a silent shutter. It's actually quite noticeable. It's okay, it's loud. Now, is this a problem? If you ask me, certainly not. You know, I shoot street photography, and the kind of street photography I shoot is of the candid variety. I rarely, if ever, shoot posed portraits, and I just mostly capture candidly what goes on the street. I shoot people from behind. Well, I shoot them as in I photograph them, not shoot as in no. And I've never once startled my subjects. Never has anyone ever been startled and said to me, "What are you doing? You startled me with your big ass loud shutter." Now, this won't win any contests as far as silence goes. I'll give you that. It's a very loud and noticeable shutter, but I think that's entirely a non-issue. I've also shot this camera in churches, during weddings and sermons, and nobody has ever complained about the loudness of the shutter. What this loud shutter does, or rather did, that was in need of attention, let's say just that, was that it caused what people called shutter shock. Especially with longer lenses, especially with longer exposure times, and especially with unstabilized lenses, you could get noticeable motion blur due to the actual movement of the shutter. If you hold this camera and trigger it, you can feel it in the palm of your hand. The shutter is noticeable. It makes a palpable vibration. And that vibration can introduce a bit of motion blur in your shots. I found that adding this metal grip, which I bought from entirely different reasons, that being the thin, short grip. Now, adding this metal grip entirely and permanently solved that shutter shock issue. Now, this camera is supposed to have a very weak mount. I have not found that to be the case, but some people have, and proof for that is the fact that KNF Concept, I think it's them, make what is called a tough E-mount. That's a replacement metal ring that goes here. You take this out, and this is metal, but the actual bayonet flaps or ears, how do you call them, are made of plastic. And that tough E-mount replaces that plastic with metal. Now, that's about €80, and I think it's entirely too expensive for what it does. Especially seeing how I've never had any issues with this. And I've shot long telephoto lenses made of metal and glass, and I do support them with my hand. But I've not found that to be an issue. If you want to listen, there's just the tiniest bit of give if you try to move the lens in the mount, but really, I haven't found this to be an issue how I used it. Still, on the subject of the mount, this is supposed to also let light leak in during long exposures. And I have tested this with the body cap on at maximum ISO, maximum exposure time, and it does leak in light. But you have to shoot at 12,800 ISO for 30 seconds in completely pitch dark environments to even be able to notice this. When did you last shoot 30 seconds at 12,800 ISO? Yeah, I thought so. So that is another case of nitpicking. It is true, it does happen, but I've found it to be a non-issue entirely. That said, that's pretty much it about the camera. It has served me great. I've used it for the last couple of years with great joy, great pleasure. I've shot mostly photos, but some video. It performs great. It doesn't heat up. It doesn't... Well, it's a bit slow to start, but it has never, ever crashed on me. It has never locked up on me. It's really, really great piece of kit. Would I buy it again in 2022? If I only had 500 euros, yes, I would buy it again in a split second because I still love shooting it. It's a great camera that makes great images. Really, really perfect for me. Now, why do I want to sell it? Well, because I have a slight case of gas. That is gear acquisition syndrome. And I do sometimes wish this had in-body image stabilizing, which it does not. There are some cases where that does come in useful, and I wish it had it. So for the in-body image stabilizing, I would and do actively try to sell it and upgrade to a A7R II. I also do appreciate the bigger sensor because that has a 42 megapixel sensor with supposedly better dynamic range, and because I like shiny new things and I like buying stuff. That's pretty much, you can see that I'm not selling it because it underperforms. I'm not selling it because I can't use it or because it doesn't do things I need it to do. I'm just selling it. I'm selling it because I want something a little better. And the A7R II is admittedly better, but just a little. 36 megapixels, 42. It's just 6 megapixels difference. The IBIS is admittedly a big deal, sometimes. However, it's really rare that, come to think of it, I don't remember the last time I said, oh boy, I wish I had an IBIS with this sensor. I've come so accustomed to shooting this the way it can that I've always appreciated this camera for what it does and not for what it cannot do. Lately I've seen a lot of videos talking about the Fujifilm X Pro 1. And while I will probably never buy that camera because it doesn't interest me, crop sensors don't really interest me, I do enjoy watching them, and it has gotten me thinking, why is nobody talking about the A7R in 2022? Why has practically nobody talked about it in the last couple of years? This is a beast of a camera. It's fantastic. It's really, really great. And I do sound like a fanboy because I am. I love this camera, and I'm only selling it because I want more of this camera, if you know what I mean. It's not because it underperforms. It's not because I needed to do something that it cannot. It's just that I like buying myself new toys, and if I don't end up selling it and I do end up keeping it, I will be happy using it for at least a couple more years. That has been all, I think. If you're so inclined and you want to support me, and if you appreciate the work I do here, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link down below in the description. You can make a small donation there. But by far, the most helpful thing you can do is to like this video, to share it with your friends, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell before you go. This has been Radu. This has been, and still is, the lovely Sony a7R. See you. Bye bye. Be well.